I used to think minding your own business was a virtue. After 79 years, I'm not so sure anymore. My name is Arthur. I'm 79 years old, and I live on a quiet street in a town where nothing much happens. Or at least, that's what I believed until one Tuesday afternoon last spring, when I looked out my kitchen window and saw something I wasn't supposed to see. What I did next surprised everyone, including myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't make sense without it. I've lived on Clover Street for 31 years. My wife Eleanor and I moved here when our youngest was still in high school, drawn by the big oak trees and the way the neighbors actually waved at each other when they drove past. We raised our kids here, buried our dog here, and when Eleanor passed 6 years ago, I stayed because leaving would have felt like losing her twice. This house has my fingerprints on every wall. Quite literally, I painted the whole thing myself the summer of 1998, and I still missed a spot above the back door that Eleanor never let me forget. After she passed, my days took on a gentle rhythm. I wake early, make coffee strong enough to offend someone, sit at the kitchen table with the newspaper, and watch the street come alive. School buses, dog walkers, the fellow 3 doors down who jogs in what I can only describe as very ambitious shorts regardless of the weather. I know this street. I know its sounds and its schedules and the particular way the light falls through my kitchen window on a clear afternoon. My neighbors to the left, the Callahan family, had lived next door for about 8 years by then. Martin and Diane Callahan and their teenage daughter, Paige. Martin worked in insurance, I believe. Solid fellow, quiet, always returned borrowed tools without being asked, which in my experience is one of the more reliable measures of a person's character. Diane was warm and a little scattered in the way that busy women with too much on their plates often are. She'd bring me soup when she made too much, which happened more often than seemed accidental. I think she worried about me living alone. People do. Once you reach a certain age, they see you and they see their own future, and it makes them want to feed you. Across the street lived the Beaumonts, Gary and Susan, no children, 2 very opinionated cats. Gary traveled for work, gone 3 or 4 days at a stretch. Susan was friendly in a surface way, always pleasant at the mailbox, never quite letting you pass the pleasantries. I didn't know them well. Some neighbors are like wallpaper. You're aware of them. You'd notice if they were gone, but you don't think much about them in between. That Tuesday in April started like any other. I was at my kitchen table with my coffee and the crossword, the window open because the weather had finally decided to behave after a miserable March. I wasn't watching the street with any particular intention. I was just existing in it, the way you do when you're old, and you've learned that the world reveals itself more generously when you're not demanding anything from it. It was around 2 in the afternoon. Martin Callahan's car wasn't in the driveway, he was at work, as always on a Tuesday. Paige was at school, and I watched, in the entirely ordinary way you watch the street you've lived on for 3 decades, as a car I didn't recognize pulled up in front of the Callahan house. A dark blue sedan, newer model. What happened next was nothing dramatic. There was no scene, no spectacle. Martin Callahan stepped out of that car. Now, I sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with something that doesn't quite add up. Martin's own car was gone. He'd driven away that morning at his usual time, the same as any other Tuesday. And yet here he was, getting out of a different car entirely, in the middle of the afternoon, glancing up and down the street, in a way that a man glances when he hopes no one is looking. I wasn't looking. I was just there, which is different. He went inside. 20 minutes later, he came back out, got in the blue sedan, and drove away. And then Susan Beaumont's front door opened, and she walked back across the street to her own house. I sat with my cold coffee for a long time after that. Now, I want to be careful here, because I've lived long enough to know that human situations are rarely as simple as they appear. And I've been wrong before in ways that cost me. There was a misunderstanding in 1987 involving a neighbor, a missing ladder, and a conclusion I jumped to that I'm still a little embarrassed about. So I didn't assume. I noted what I'd seen, and I set it aside, and I watched. Over the following 2 weeks, I saw the blue sedan 3 more times. Same pattern. Martin's car gone. Blue sedan arrives. Martin inside for 15 or 20 minutes. Susan crosses back to her house. On the 4th occasion, I happened to be getting my mail, and I saw Martin's face clearly as he drove away. He didn't see me, and there was something in his expression, not guilt exactly, but a kind of flatness, the face of someone carrying something heavy they've decided not to put down. I thought about Eleanor constantly during those 2 weeks. I thought about the 38 years we had together, the arguments and the silences and the particular way she'd reach for my hand in the car without looking up from whatever she was reading. I thought about what it would have felt like to be Diane Callahan, making extra soup, worrying about the old man next door, not knowing what was happening 30 feet from her kitchen. I didn't want to get involved. I want to be honest about that. My first instinct was to look away and let things take whatever course they were going to take. I'm 79 years old. I've watched enough of life to know that people's marriages are complicated in ways that outsiders can't fully see, and that inserting yourself into someone else's story can do damage you never intended. I thought about saying nothing. I thought about it seriously, and for a while, I thought it was the right call. But then one evening, Diane brought over a container of chicken and rice. She'd made too much, she said, as always, and she sat at my kitchen table for a little while, the way she sometimes did. And she talked about Martin. She said he'd seemed distracted lately, that she was worried about him, that she wondered if something was wrong at work and he just wasn't saying. She wasn't asking me anything specific. She was just talking, the way people talk when something is weighing on them and they haven't found the right place to put it yet. And I sat across from her and I thought about what I knew, and I thought about what it means to actually care about another person versus what it means to simply be kind to their face. I didn't say anything that night, but I made a decision. I didn't go to Diane directly. I thought about that option, and I kept coming back to the fact that anything I said to her would land like a bomb in the middle of her life, and I wasn't sure that was mine to do. Instead, the next morning, I walked across the street and I knocked on Martin Callahan's door before he left for work. He answered, looking startled, the way people look when an unexpected knock interrupts their private thoughts. I told him plainly and without much preamble that I had seen the blue sedan on several occasions over the past few weeks, and that I thought he should know that. I told him I wasn't interested in his explanation, and I wasn't there to threaten him or judge him. I told him that his wife had sat in my kitchen the night before, talking about how worried she was about him, and that she deserved better than that worry being wasted on something she didn't even know the truth of. He went very still. The color left his face, and then he said something I didn't expect. He said he'd been trying to end it for a month and hadn't found the courage. We stood on his front porch for about 10 minutes. I didn't say very much after that. I just listened, which is something I've found over the years that people need far more than advice. He was ashamed. He was scared. He was, I think, genuinely lost in the way that people get when they've made choices that slowly separated them from the person they thought they were. I didn't tell him what to do. I'm not his father, and I'm not his priest. But before I left, I told him that the longer a thing stays hidden, the heavier it gets, and that I knew something about carrying weight that didn't need to be carried, and that there was still time to choose differently. I don't know exactly what happened after that. I'm not privy to the conversations that took place inside that house over the following days. What I do know is that about a week later, Martin Callahan rang my doorbell. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly, but also like a man who had put something down that he'd been holding for too long. He told me that he had told Diane the truth. He said it quietly, without asking me for a reaction. I nodded. He thanked me, which I didn't fully understand, and then he went home. The Callahans went through a hard stretch after that, anyone could see it. There were quiet evenings, separate cars, the particular careful stillness of a house where difficult things are being worked through. Paige stayed with her aunt for a few weeks. The street felt different for a while, heavier somehow, the way air feels before a storm. But they're still there, both of them. I see them in the driveway on Sunday mornings, and it's not the same as it was before, nothing ever is, but there's something in how they move around each other now that strikes me as more deliberate than it used to be, more chosen. Like they're people who know the alternative and have decided on each other anyway. That's not nothing. In fact, I think that might be everything. Susan Beaumont and her cats moved away the following summer. I don't know where she went, and I didn't ask. People have asked me since then, my daughter mostly, who worries about me and thinks I insert myself into situations I shouldn't, whether I made the right choice. And I understand the question. I know there's a school of thought that says, stay in your lane, tend your own garden, let adults manage their own lives. And there's wisdom in that. I believe in that wisdom. But I also believe this. Kindness isn't always comfortable. Sometimes caring about someone means doing the thing that might cost you the easy relationship. Eleanor taught me that. She was the most genuinely kind person I ever knew, and she was completely unafraid of a hard conversation when it was the right one to have. She used to say that most cruelty isn't loud. It's just people deciding that their own comfort is more important than someone else's truth. I've thought about that a lot over the years, and I think she was right. I'm 79 years old. I've lost people I loved and made mistakes I can't undo, and learned things too late to use them properly. But one thing that gets clearer as you get older, if you're paying attention, is the difference between being neutral and being kind. They feel similar from the outside. They are not the same thing. My kitchen window is still there. The oak trees are still there. The street is still quiet and ordinary and full of lives that are quietly complicated in ways that outsiders can't fully see. I still sit with my coffee in the morning and watch it come alive. I'm just a little less certain than I used to be that looking away is always the honorable thing.